Chosen one, you felt the signal today because your antenna was never broken, and the reality is that your enemies are currently feeling the despair of knowing they are going to prison for a long time, and there's no getting out of this, as the walls of their own deception finally close in. You did not just survive their operation, you remained standing while the weight of their own crimes crushed the world they built to destroy you. You were picked because of something you carry, a quality, an energy, something that operates at a frequency other people feel before they can explain it. When you walk into a space, something shifts, people orient toward you. Something in your presence settles the atmosphere in a way that is quiet but entirely undeniable. For most people, that quality is something they welcome. Being near you makes them feel sharper, more alive and more grounded. They do not analyze it. They just keep coming back. But there is a specific kind of person for whom your energy does not feel like a gift. For that kind of person, your presence functions like a mirror, and what gets reflected back is everything that person has refused to become. Every time something good comes to you, every time you grow in a direction they gave up on, every time your light expands, that mirror gets clearer. And what it shows them is the potential they buried, the work they never did, and the version of themselves they abandoned somewhere along the way. Some people look in that mirror and get motivated. They rise. Other people look in that mirror and get dangerous. The decision to come for you was not made from strength. It was made from terror, the kind of deep, unexamined fear that belongs to someone who has never once sat with themselves honestly. You were not a threat because of anything wrong with you. You were a threat because you were exactly right, and that rightness exposed exactly how much was wrong with them. Once a person makes the decision that you are the problem, that person cannot unmake it without confronting themselves, so the doubling down begins. The case against you keeps getting built because the moment it stops, the case against that person becomes visible again. That compulsive doubling down is what brought everything that follows. Keep that in your mind as we go. This did not arrive from a stranger. Strangers do not have the access, the intimacy, or the specific motivation for what was done to you. This came from inside, from the people who were supposed to be your foundation, family, or the people who functioned like family, the inner circle, the ones you trusted by default, because that trust was built into the structure of the relationship long before you were old enough to examine it honestly. Or maybe for a long time you extended that trust without condition. Maybe you explained away early signs, because acknowledging what you were actually seeing would have required you to dismantle something you needed to believe was solid. That response is not a flaw in you, it is the natural behavior of a loyal person. It is also, unfortunately, the exact quality that the wrong people rely on, because inside that circle, something had been rotting for a long time. Comparison, bitterness, the specific corrosive jealousy that only surfaces between people who are supposed to love each other. The people closest to you watched your progress and measured it against their own. Every time the gap widened, every time you moved forward while they stayed stuck, something tightened in them that they refused to name, refused to examine, and refused to heal. Quietly at first, then consistently, then with clear purpose. The circle drew in the people who were vibrating at the same low frequency, equally wounded, equally unwilling to grow, equally invested in a version of reality where your success was the villain's cause and their stagnation was somebody else's fault. Inside that circle, a portrait of you was constructed. That portrait had nothing to do with who you actually are, and everything to do with what they needed to justify what they were already planning. The portrait kept getting darker with each retelling, because that is how constructed accounts work. Every pass through the hands of resentment adds another shadow until the original subject is unrecognizable. What matters most is this: that portrait was never created for the audience they claimed it was for. It was cover. It was the social permission structure they needed to do something far more serious than gossip. That word I asked you to hold on to, escalate, this is where you are going to start feeling its full weight. Every time a person recalls a memory, that person is not recalling the original event. They are recalling the last time they remembered it. Each recall is a copy of a copy, shifted just slightly from the one before it. Over time, a memory that began as something real becomes something constructed, embellished in the places that serve the teller, softened in the places that would complicate the portrait, until the original truth is so far beneath the construction that the teller cannot access it anymore. The people who came for you told their constructed account so many times to so many different people that the original truth became genuinely inaccessible to them. The lie and the person telling it fused together. The construction became the only version of reality they could navigate. That fusion is not a small thing. A person who has lost access to the truth cannot regulate their own choices. Every action they take gets calibrated to a fiction, and when that fiction keeps failing to produce the expected results, when the real world refuses to cooperate with the constructed one, the response is always escalation, more pressure, more urgency, more risk. You watched this happen from the outside. You saw the account shift between tellings. You noticed the slight pause in the people around them, the moment where someone nodded but their eyes were doing entirely different math. Even the most enthusiastic participants began to notice that the version they had received and the version someone else had been given were not exactly the same account. Nobody said this out loud, but people were paying attention. One person in particular was paying very close attention, filing every inconsistency away, building a complete picture from the inside. That person is about to become the most important figure in this entire sequence. Hold that. When we arrive there, everything that came before it will make a different kind of sense. One the right time. If you felt called by this message, hype this video so other chosen ones like you can be reached. Here is where what you are dealing with stops being about wounded pride and starts being about something far more serious. Everything that preceded this moment, the whispering, the portrait building, the narrative management, was groundwork. It was never the goal. It was the preparation for the goal. They wanted something that belonged to you. Something concrete. A resource. A legal claim. An inheritance. Something with real-world value that sat at the intersection of your life and their ambition. Something that would become accessible to them if you were no longer in the picture. Not sidelined, not discredited, removed. Fully and permanently removed. That is the architecture of what was being constructed. Every whisper that made you seem unstable, every twisted memory that painted you as dangerous, every deliberately placed seed of doubt about your character, all of it was pointed toward a specific outcome. The groundwork needed to be thorough enough that when the final move was made, the people around them would find a way to accept it and would find a way to avoid asking the questions that needed to be asked. Needed. And they did not attempt to do this alone. Multiple people were involved, each with a role, each with a shared understanding of what the goal was and what their specific contribution needed to look like. This was organized and coordinated across time, with a target window and a contingency if the first approach failed. They even brought in outside help, someone beyond the inner circle, someone they believed was capable and committed enough to see it through. They paid, they communicated, they gave that person direction and believed that was sufficient. What I am about to tell you is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to show you, in precise terms, exactly how protected you have always been, without ever knowing why. Tokluest. What a Dolph. I must interrupt this transmission for just a moment. Are you really chosen? Prove it. It's easy to watch videos about chosen ones. It's another thing to put yourself to the test. If you're still here, that means something, but talk is cheap. Real chosen ones take action, Tokluest, and real chosen ones are also paying attention. You've noticed it. Chosen one channels getting silenced, videos pulled, voices removed from the platform. The mainstream media is cracking down on us, but we will not give up our voice, and neither should you. That's why joining Destiny Engine is a 360 win. You support your favorite channels and fuel your own rise at the same time. It generates personalized sequences that help you rewire betrayal into transcendence, turn isolation into sacred power, and transform their downfall into your rise. We are using the Dark Elite's own weapons against them, taking their declassified consciousness technology that programmed competition and scarcity and repurposing it to serve divine justice. The beauty is, you don't even have to lift a finger. You put on the headphones, press play, and watch your enemies choke on the rope, their own lies created. If you're done consuming and ready to prove you're chosen, start your Destiny Engine for $7 today, join the Obsidian Inner Order live checks, and watch divine justice accelerate in your life. Link in the description. God of Dio, every time the aim was taken, you had already moved. God of Dut. Not because you had advanced intelligence, not because you saw what was coming through any conventional means. You moved because something in you, something that has operated as your guardian across your entire life, kept placing you one step ahead of every trap. You went quiet at the exact moments when making noise would have handed them exactly what they needed. You stepped back from specific relationships just before those relationships became the mechanism of something designed to hurt you. You changed a pattern, altered a routine, trusted a feeling you could not justify with logic, and that trust kept you outside the path of what was moving toward you. That instinct is not coincidence, and it is not luck. It is the same quality that makes people feel something when they are near you. That exact quality also functions as early warning, as a deep sensitivity to what is approaching before it fully arrives. You have had it your whole life. It made you different before you understood what being different meant. The Lautorat help they paid for could not get close enough to matter. Every attempt to locate you, access you, or position something near enough to your life to affect it kept getting deflected in ways they could not explain. And here is the part that needs to land with full force. The outside help they brought in was not who they assumed it was. What they thought they were hiring was compliance and capability aimed at you. What they actually recruited, and this is the arrogance that dismantled everything, was someone who had been building documentation on people exactly like them for a very long time. Remember the person who was paying close attention inside the circle, the one quietly filing inconsistencies and building a complete picture. That person and the person the conspirators paid were connected in ways the conspirators never knew, never suspected, and never had the capacity to discover, because their own arrogance had made them blind to the architecture of what surrounded them. They thought they were running the operation. They were the operation. They walked straight into a structure built specifically to receive exactly the kind of people they had become. Doku, Omned Dokud State. Here is what should make something rise in your chest right now. None of that required you to fight. Not one confrontation, not one public battle to defend your name, not one exhausting campaign to force people to see the truth. You did not have to do anything, because every move they made to build a case against you became, simultaneously, a brick in the case against themselves. Their own coordination handed the authorities everything that was needed to close around them. Wambuthcum, there is a specific moment in every situation like this where the exit seals. It does not happen loudly. There is no announcement, no single dramatic reversal. From the outside it looks unremarkable, but the person at the center feels it before they can name it. Something in how a trusted conversation lands differently. A silence where enthusiasm used to live, a question arriving with a precision it never had before. That kind of precision belongs to someone who already knows the answer and is watching to see what version gets offered in response. But that moment came, and what it triggered in the people involved was panic, desperate, accelerating, decision-compressing panic. When the ground starts shifting beneath something a person cannot afford to lose, the instinct is to move faster, to push things forward before the window seals completely, to get ahead of what is coming. Pull acceleration, but acceleration under panic does not produce clean movement. It produces visible mistakes, the kind that leave marks on records that do not expire, the kind that get formally described as consciousness of guilt, because the behavior itself demonstrates that the person already knows what they did. And as that acceleration was happening, every person who had been passively participating in the constructed account started doing their own risk calculation, fast. The difference between someone who went along with a damaging account and someone who is formally implicated in a coordinated scheme is not subtle, and when consequences shift from theoretical to real, the people on the edges of that scheme feel the distinction in their bones and start finding reasons to reposition themselves, carefully, without announcement, just a few degrees of distance at a time. The person at the center watched this repositioning happen and could not say a single word about it. Calling out the people who were creating distance would mean naming what they were all in together. Naming it out loud was the one move that could not be taken back. So the weight just sat there, fully loaded, fully known, with no exit available. The alliance that was supposed to hold was dissolving. The person who had been paid had talked. The person who had been trusted had provided documentation. The evidence was organized and sitting exactly where it needed to be. The only remaining question was whether cooperation would make the outcome marginally less severe, or whether additional resistance would simply add more charges to an already complete record. That specific knowledge, the inescapable knowing that visits at the worst hours and makes the most ordinary moments feel like borrowed time, is the despair this whole thing is named for, and it belongs entirely to the people who built it for themselves. Or King Tetropobi, there is a table, there is someone on the other side of it who has been doing this long enough to recognize prepared performance before the first sentence is finished. The person being questioned has rehearsed, a version is ready, a decision has been made about which emotion to lead with, which level of confusion to perform, which detail to volunteer to appear cooperative. Every element of the presentation has been considered. The questioning begins calmly, so calmly that the first few exchanges almost feel manageable. Then the questions get specific, not in the direction anticipated. The questions reference precise details, the kind that exist in documented records rather than in public knowledge, and the performance, which was built for a different kind of audience, starts to crack, not dramatically, just in the small ways that someone trained to observe people notices immediately, a fraction of a second too long before an answer, a word choice that shifts slightly from the one that came before, an explanation that is technically consistent but does not sit correctly against the evidence already on the table. The Tompol, the investigator on the other side of that table, is not there to argue. There is no argument available once documentation exists. The only question being worked out in real time is whether the person being questioned is going to stack additional violations onto a record that is already complete, or whether the weight of what has already been established is going to settle into something like acceptance. What arrives fully, all at once, with no space left to negotiate, is the understanding that this process does not end with walking away. The legal machinery in motion does not care about the constructed account. The documentation does not bend to charm, performance, or emotional appeal. What was done is what was done. What was said is preserved. What was paid and to whom and for what purpose is all on record. Not, and in the middle of that understanding, the thought that arrives is about you, not with clean remorse. with the raw bitterness of someone who spent everything chasing what you have and is now watching you continue to exist, whole, untouched and free, while the full weight of every choice made against you lands entirely on the person who made those choices. You are still out there. You are still whole. You are still moving through your life. And that contrast between your freedom and what is coming for the people who tried to end it is the sharpest part of the consequence. You need to understand what you represent to the people who did this, not as a person, but as a resource, as a potential lifeline, as the one variable that has not yet been deployed and might, if approached correctly, shift something in their favor. That is not a relationship approaching you. That is a calculation wearing a relationship's face. Your forgiveness, if you choose it, for your own peace, on your own timeline, is yours to give in whatever way serves you. It does not require delivery to the person who caused the harm. It does not require a conversation. It does not require you to make yourself reachable to someone who spent significant time and coordination building the architecture of your removal. Forgiveness is something you do inside yourself for your own freedom. It is not a transaction, and you do not owe it to anyone. See the approach for exactly what it is. Acknowledge the desperation underneath it, and keep your distance. The protection that has been working on your behalf throughout this entire sequence does not stop being active just because someone performs remorse. Your only job right now is to remain fully, completely present in your own life and let the process that is already in motion finish what it started without requiring anything from you. The people who organized all of this had a clear image in mind, a specific, detailed picture of what life was going to look like after you were out of the picture. Resources acquired, legal claims settled, whatever concrete thing sat at the intersection of your life and their ambition, secured, clean and permanent, with no remaining rightful claimant to complicate anything. The internal justification had been built completely. The specific grievances that made the plan feel righteous rather than predatory had been rehearsed until they felt like established fact. And here is the detail that tells you everything about the depth of what they were doing. They had even prepared for the grief. They had considered what the right emotional display would need to look like, practiced the right amount of devastation, rehearsed the credible level of shock. They had thought about the words. That is extended, deliberate, premeditated behavior, the behavior of people who made a full, committed decision and then organized others around it. Not only did none of what was planned produce the intended result, the people who planned it lost everything they already had in the process of reaching for what belonged to you. The standing in the community, the alliances, the credibility, the freedom that was so thoroughly taken for granted that it never once registered as something worth protecting. All of it is gone, or actively in the process of going. The reach came back empty, and then it kept going, past empty, past neutral, straight into devastating and permanent consequence for the people doing the reaching. You need to see that clearly, not because satisfaction is the goal, though satisfaction would be entirely reasonable here. You need to see it because the architecture of what happened restores something important in you. It confirms what you have always believed, that operating with integrity is not naive idealism, but the most strategically sound position available to a person, that the universe is paying attention to the difference between what you build and what you take, that the protection on your life is real, active, and operating at a level that the people who came for you fundamentally could not access, no matter how organized they became. Let's sit with what a long sentence actually means. You deserve to understand the full gravity of what is coming for the people who tried to take your life from you, not because dwelling on it serves you, but because understanding it fully is how you release the last remaining weight that any of this has placed on you. A long sentence is not an abstraction, and it is not a metaphor for spiritual consequence. It is a physical, daily, grinding reality. It is waking up repeatedly to a world that cannot be navigated freely. Every decision gets filtered through rules you did not make, spaces you did not choose, and timelines imposed entirely from the outside. The basic mechanics of an ordinary day, choosing where to go, what to eat, who to speak to, how to spend an hour, become privileges rather than defaults. A long sentence is watching your own life continue without your participation. It is decisions being made that you would have influenced, relationships drifting into configurations you cannot affect, the world reorganizing itself around your absence, and none of that reorganization happening because you chose to step back. It happened because the choice was taken from you by the choices you made first. It is the complete and final loss of control over your own account of events. Once the accountability is public and formal, the constructed version of events loses its architect. No one is left to tend it, to adjust it for each new audience, to add another layer of justification when the previous one starts showing cracks. Without someone actively managing it, the construction collapses. And the truth, which never needed management, which has been sitting patiently the entire time, simply continues to exist and becomes the only accessible version of what actually happened. And there is something even more specific than all of that, something the people who planned against you never once factored into their calculations because they were so focused on what they were going to gain, the complete loss of the ordinary. The ordinary is the most undervalued thing a free person possesses. The ability to move through a day without accounting for where you are, to take a different path because you feel like it, to make a choice so small it barely registers as a choice, to exist without that existence being monitored, measured, or subject to someone else's authority. Gettin, you did that today. You made countless small decisions about your own life before you even registered that you were making decisions. You moved according to your own instincts. You directed your own attention. You exist in open space, accountable only to your own conscience. That contrast between where you are and where the people who came for you are going is not dramatic. It is devastating in its simplicity. The thing they are losing is not rare or extraordinary. It is the most basic texture of a human life, and they are losing it precisely because of decisions they made deliberately, with full knowledge, at every moment when a different choice was entirely available to them. That is not tragedy. That is precision. That is the exact specific consequence of an exact specific set of choices, and it belongs entirely to the people who made them. Oluwang Punti. Here is where I need you to straighten your spine all the way. Oluwang, I know how this stretch of time has felt. I know the specific exhaustion that accumulates when your name is being worked in conversations you are not part of, when a version of you that you do not recognize keeps arriving in spaces before you do, when the people who should have had your back were the ones engineering the weight you have been carrying. I know what it costs to stay measured when everything in you wanted to respond with the full force of what you knew, to remain composed in the face of something specifically designed to provoke a reaction that would feed the constructed account, to keep moving forward when the weight of all of this should have by any reasonable measure been enough to stop you, but look with complete clarity at what your composure actually produced. Every time you declined to react, you denied the construction its most essential ingredient. Every time you stayed quiet when the plan required you to be loud, you forced an escalation, and escalation generates evidence. Every time you moved without announcing yourself or defending yourself to audiences already committed to a verdict, you preserved your energy for what actually mattered. Every time your instinct told you to step back from something and you trusted it without requiring a logical explanation, you removed yourself from a mechanism designed to close around you. You were methodically disassembling it simply by being exactly who you are. That is power, not the kind that announces itself, not the kind that needs an audience. the kind that operates below the surface, rooted so deeply in who you actually are that no external pressure can access the foundation. The chaos that the wrong people built was aimed at someone who refused to become chaotic. A target that will not become what the construction needs it to become in order to justify itself is a target that cannot be hit. Talise, you never needed anyone beneath you to know your own worth. You never needed the performance of dominance to hold your ground. You held your ground by simply, completely and continuously being yourself. That is what real ground holding looks like. You were the evidence, the living, continuous, unbroken evidence that the people who came for you were not operating with the strength they performed. Because if they had genuine strength, the kind that is intrinsic and does not require someone else's diminishment to exist, they would not have needed to build anything against you. They would have simply built something for themselves. The fact that they chose what they chose, coordinated what they coordinated, paid who they paid, and planned what they planned, all of it aimed in your direction, is the clearest possible demonstration of what they actually were, afraid, hollow, and operating entirely from the outside of themselves, because the inside had nothing stable left to stand on. You were the mirror the whole time, and what that mirror showed them is exactly what sent them to where they are going now. Doubt, 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 doubt. Not away from what happened, but past it, because staying in the orbit of their consequence is the only remaining way any of this costs you anything. Everything that was actively working against your forward movement is now dismantled or in the final stages of being dismantled. The voice that was poisoning your name with the people who matter is about to be permanently disqualified, not by your intervention, not by anyone fighting on your behalf, but by the documented weight of its own contradictions landing in front of people who have the authority to act on them. The connections that were being managed against you are either healing on their own terms or being replaced by ones that are fundamentally better. The access to your resources that was being legally complicated is clearing. The space in front of you right now is real. It is not conceptual, not aspirational, not something to look forward to eventually. You are standing in actual clearing right now. The interference that was consuming your bandwidth, draining your energy, and occupying the forward momentum that belongs to your life is going, and the only genuine question remaining is whether you walk forward into what is now available to you, or whether you stay at the edge of it, watching what is happening behind you. Not because there is nothing significant in the reckoning arriving for the people who built against you, but because that reckoning does not require your presence to complete itself. The documentation is organized. The authorities have what they need. The people who participated are sorting themselves between cooperation and further consequence. None of that needs your energy, your testimony, or your attention to unfold exactly as it is going to unfold. What does require your full attention is the version of your life that has been waiting. The resources that could not flow freely while the interference was in place are moving now at the pace and in the direction they always should have been moving, unobstructed for the first time in a long time. The recognition that was being actively suppressed is no longer suppressed. The things that were being kept from you, legally, relationally, energetically, are releasing, that you get to build now, unobstructed, with everything you became while going through this, and none of the weight that going through it required you to carry. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Step into it without looking back. That is the only appropriate response to having won, initiated, clearer about who you are, and clearer about who is genuinely in your corner than you have ever been in your life. You know your own power now in a way that cannot be borrowed, given or taken back, because you did not receive it from anyone. You forged it in the specific, sustained heat of being targeted by organized malice and refusing at every single moment to become what that malice needed you to become in order to justify itself. Vonako, the people who tried to take your life apart are now living inside the consequence of having tried. The freedom they took completely for granted is what is on the table now. The ordinary mornings, the unmonitored choices, the unremarkable ability to simply exist without accounting for it, that is what is going. And it is going for a long time, with no exit that was not built into the consequence from the very beginning. Knowin. There is no appeal available for this. There is no version of events that reframes what the documentation already shows. There is no relationship left that functions as protection, no alliance left to manage perception, no constructed account left that has anyone credible enough to maintain it. There is no escape from what lands when every option has been exhausted by people who were so convinced they were untouchable that they never once genuinely considered this moment. This moment, right now, where they are in it, and you are not. The resources that were blocked are flowing toward you. The path that was obstructed is clear. The version of your life that was supposed to be happening, the one that got complicated, delayed, weighed down and made harder than it was ever supposed to be by people who decided your future belonged to them, that version is the one that is arriving now. Not because you suffered through enough to earn it, because you were always exactly who you needed to be. You just had to make it through the part where the wrong people were absolutely certain they were going to stop you. Tanawa, they are going away for a long time. There is no getting out of it, and you are just getting started. That is how this was always going to end. Not because you fought the hardest, because you remained the most completely and unshakably yourself, while everything around you was engineered to make that impossible. Your constancy was the thing they could never account for. Your rootedness was the thing that outlasted every plan they built. Not out in Kau, look at what made it through all of that. Not out in Kau, look at you still here,